Hello, good listeners. This is Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, and we're back with another story about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Thanks for tuning in. Back in October of 2025, I had the opportunity to speak with Maria Lotsmanova. Maria has worked at Moscow's Gulag History Museum of Soviet Repressions, where she headed the documentation center. Her personal research focuses on her great-grandfather, Jacob Petrovich Janzen, who was forced into a special settlement and then the Gulag system during the Stalin regime in the former Soviet Union. Today, we're bringing you part one of my conversation with Maria. Welcome to Tales, Maria. What sparked your interest to dig deeper into your Janzen family history?
I would say curiosity, actually. It was just one day that I came across this instruction on the internet where they would explain you how to request archival files of the repressed ancestors. So I knew that my great-grandfather was repressed, but I didn't realize that those archival files are still there. And I was just interested if I could get any copies. I was just curious.
You have a fascinating story about how that passion for your family history landed you a job.
Yeah, that's true. So as I got these first copies, I learned a lot about the personality of my great-grandfather because in his first case in 1933, he would write testimony himself. So that was a direct speech, basically. And he would appear as a human being. He would give very personal answers, and that would really show his character. And I got really interested in him.
Was it unusual for a prisoner in that circumstance to write their own testimony?
I'm not quite sure, but I would say that the cases from the beginning of the 1930s, they were still more informative, unlike the cases from the Great Terror. Yeah, he was an educated guy, he could write, so he would do that. As I kept digging in, I had some questions as well, like where to look for some extra information, and because I never had experience with of working with archives. That's how it's that just one day I remembered about this Gulag History Museum where I've been just once before. It turned out that they had somebody to help people like me who would consult you about this archival work. So that's how I came there and asked for help. And the guy who was helping me, he just saw that I was so very much involved and inspired. It turned out that he was leaving the place like in a month, and he was looking for somebody to replace him. And he just introduced me to the director, and that's how I got the place.
Lots of Mennonites ended up in the Gulag. What landed Jacob in the sights of Soviet authorities? What was his crime?
It started all with the dekulakization, so-called. It comes from the word kulak, which is from Russian. It's fist. So basically, kulaks, the Soviets saw them as just wealthy guys who didn't want to give up their land, who didn't want to go to the collectives. They decided to so-called dekulakize them, expropriate their property and send them to underdeveloped areas in Siberia or in the north, so that people would become a cheap labor there. So my ancestors, the Janzen family, they were sent from Crimea to the north of Russia, to Arkhangelsk region, to the special settlement. This was the beginning of this system, and conditions were harder than you can imagine, and people were basically really surviving there. So my great-grandfather, he wasn't satisfied, of course, with these conditions, and he was trying to... he was demanding the better conditions for...
In the special settlements?
Yeah, in the special settlements, he would be... he would speak up, basically, for himself. And also, as they were, like, starving, really, he would be in correspondence with his brother-in-law, Abraham Harder, who was already living in Germany by that time because they managed to leave the Soviet Union in 1924. He would describe the situation, and Abraham would send them food and money. And some of these letters were, of course, intercepted. And so, yeah, he was also sentenced just for criticizing the system and the conditions. It was all called anti-Soviet propaganda.
And so then he was sentenced to the Gulag, which is the next level of imprisonment after special settlements for those guys they really didn't like.
Yeah, exactly. So he was sent to the camp in Siberia and Novosibirsk region for 3.5 years. I mean, he was sentenced to 5 years, but managed to get out earlier in 3.5 years, and got back to the special settlement in Arkhangelsk region to spend some more time with his family before he was sentenced again in 1938 in the Great Terror. That was the sentence to death already. Yeah, he was executed.
Have you discovered anything from other sources about his second trial and defense that led to his execution? Did he change the ways in which he responded to his accusers?
I mean, it's hard to say because the NKVD people, they just had lists and they just needed numbers. The testimonies are already quite short. There's no much coming from him. He says that yes, he corresponded with his brother-in-law, but he doesn't agree of any other charges, and that's all he has to say. Yeah, some of the witnesses, so-called, their testimonies are quite picturesque because they would describe him as quite an independent guy and quite a smart guy who realized what was going on in terms of the politics and the situation, the global situation. Yeah.
It's my understanding that your family did not much discuss your German Mennonite ancestry. How did your family react to learning more information about your great-grandfather, Jakob Janzen?
They, this is my mother's side, the Mennonite side. She was supportive, and she would ask questions from time to time. What's the news? Did I find anything else interesting? She would also connect me to some other relatives because I wanted to, spread my research a little bit. Some of them had doubts and even fears sometimes because, I mean, they lived in the Soviet Union more than I did, and they have this memory, and they were afraid if it wasn't too dangerous for me to dig this story. And but in the very end, everyone was supportive, and they were really happy that I discovered some new documents for them, and I sent all the copies I had. Basically, in the end they were quite supportive.
I read somewhere that you have discovered extended Mennonite family elsewhere in Russia, in Germany, in Kyrgyzstan, and elsewhere.
Mm.
Have you had, or do you hope to have, any face-to-face meetings with some of these distant relatives?
Yeah, in Russia, not many relatives left actually from this side. Yeah, I have some relatives in Kyrgyzstan and in Germany, especially. I think the biggest part of them. Yeah, and I kind of reconnected to some of them as I moved to Germany now. I mean, yeah, we're not that close, but we stay in touch.
Have you traveled back to visit the Gulag locations where your grandfather was held?
Not the camp, the Gulag camp where he was held in Novosibirsk region. I mean, you have to understand that not much left actually from this whole Gulag infrastructure. I would say that some parts are left just in the Far East, where it's really hard to get for people, but basically not much is left. But I've traveled to the special settlement places in Arkhangelsk region, and nothing is left there, of course, because special settlements, war formations. There were like this so-called villages that were created only for the certain purpose. For example, they had this like forest they had to cut, and so they would build a village there for like, I don't know, 5 years. Then the goal is done. The goal is achieved. Like they done everything they had to, and people would be moved to another for another work somewhere else. Yeah, so like there are no like basically no villages left. I mean, there is a railway still there. The railway that was like the main connection basically at that time. They were brought by the railway. There is a station there, like a small village around. It was just a feeling that I had that I just want to go there. So this is one thing, and I also I went to Crimea, to the places where they used to live, and this is where I actually found my great-grandfather's house, which is still there. It's like 100 something years old already. Um, it's now a very local museum, which unfortunately doesn't say much about my ancestors' family history. I mean, it was created in the late 80s, and it's basically tells the Soviet story of the place. But the building is still there, and I was really surprised to find it.
You made a short documentary about your Mennonite background and your great-grandfather. It's called I Have Nothing to Add. What inspired you to share his story publicly, and where does the title come from?
I haven't made it myself. The director of this film is Tatiana Stefanenko, a friend of mine. My part is the research part and the voiceover, some contemporary photographs. So she was so inspired by my great-grandfather and what he had to say as well, that she really wanted to try to make a documentary. I think because I wasn't, I was the source of the material, but I never influenced any scenarios. I didn't mind to share at all because I find this piece really beautiful, and I think it's a great way to tell the story. So yeah, I never had any problem with going public with that.
What inspired the title, I Have Nothing to Add?
I Have Nothing to Add is something that my great-grandfather wrote. I think it was his last testimony. That's everything I have to say. I have nothing to add. That's like the last words he said.
I've said all I need to say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that comes from the case.
You've been listening to part one of my conversation with Maria Lotsmanova. She began researching her connection to Mennonites as an adult in Moscow. A film about her great-grandfather, Jacob Petrovich Janzen, is called I Have Nothing More to Add. It was directed by Tatiana Stefanenko and can be found on YouTube. The Mennonite Heritage Archives holds a few books and rare letters about Mennonites who were sent to forced labor camps during the Stalin regime in the former Soviet Union. A group photo that includes Jacob Petrovich Janzen can be seen online at mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
Tell us what you're taking away from this program by dashing off an email to info@mharchives.ca. Join me next week for part 2 of my conversation with Maria Lotsmanova. We'll talk about what it means for victims of forced labor camps to be rehabilitated and discuss threats to archival institutions in Ukraine since the Russian invasion of 2022. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and David Klippenstein. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.